Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is Professor Bryan Caplan. Hello, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
All right, so I am doing great too, Brian. And on this show, I have a relationship with my audience. So whenever I'm about to start an interview and Zoom was being a bastard, I usually tell them. Yes, that's just my style. So guys, as you all know, I'm a very punctual guy. We should have started at 4, but Zoom as usual has been defective. So we're actually starting at 4:15, and I'm really passionate about time. It's really irritating when I don't start on time. But yes, let's get back to business. Brian, so you're a famous economist. You are known for several books, and most recently you published a book titled The Case Against Education.
Well, actually, that is the second most recent book that I've published,
Yeah,
but
I know you have another
that, but yep,
book.
but that's correct. So, do you want to find out about the book?
Of course, like before talking about a book, I either buy it or read or do some book reviews. So, Brian, why would you discourage people from acquiring a degree?
Well, I especially discourage governments from encouraging people to get degrees. What I say in the book is I start with the mystery. Why is it that it seems like it financially pays to go and study subjects that are totally impractical? Why is it that Aristotle can be a gateway to getting a good job in the banking industry? Why is it that you need to learn a foreign language that you're never going to lead to speak, or that you're never going to speak and you're never going to learn in any case, in order to just get into college or get out of college? And the story that I tell is that the reason why impractical education pays is what economists call signaling. It basically just means you're getting a stamp on your forehead, certifying your quality as a worker. And from the point of view of an individual, it doesn't really matter why education is profitable. But from the point of view of society, from the point of view of anyone who is funding education, it matters a lot. Because if education is really enhancing people's skills, then it can be that if everyone gets more education, our whole society gets richer. But if education is basically giving you a stamp on your forehead, then it's not a way to enrich society. It's a way to enrich some people at the expense of other people who look bad by comparison.
All right, Brian, you mentioned Aristotle. You said that Aristotle can be a gateway to working in management. Is that what you said?
Oh, yeah, that's correct. So, most obviously, if there's a humanities requirement to graduate from college and you are one Aristotle class short of graduation, then that can easily be devastating. It means your application gets thrown away because you're not a college graduate. And often a firm is only considering college graduates for a job.
All right. Oh, originally I made an error. I thought that you were saying that Aristotle can be a gateway to management because I've done some research on the relationship between philosophy and management. So if you were making that assumption, I would have agreed. But I get your point clearly.
Right. I mean, like in a sense, it is. Namely, if you don't have a college degree, then you can't get hired for a college type job. If you don't get that job, you'll never be a manager. So it does fit, but maybe not. Maybe in a different sense.
Yeah, but management is a discipline. It's about virtue and people, and this is why terms like people management and change management are so popular because if you want your workers to be productive, you must treat them well and respect them. So, Phil, if I were a CEO, I would not necessarily be scouting for philosophers, but I do see where philosophy can have a positive impact on the potential of future workers. But then again, there's a catch, Brian. The average philosophy student may not be able to contribute anything to management. That's the catch. It's just like anthropology. The average anthropology student cannot contribute much to finance. So if you're a brilliant person who is adept at mathematics and anthropology and philosophy, you're better off not going to college. Or if you do go to college, you're going there to network.
Right. Or what I say is you're largely going there to get a stamp on your forehead saying that you're worthwhile. Because if you don't have that, you could be fantastic, but employers are not going to know that. They're going to get an application and say, well, this person says they're great, but they didn't finish college. So probably throw them in the trash.
Mm. But I I would not discourage people from going to college because I do understand the importance of networks and social capital. Many beneficiaries of venture capital, they attended elite schools like Stanford and Harvard. So again, I say it, if you're going to go to college, you should have a roadmap, know why you're going to college.
Right. So the networking and social capital arguments, they're not totally wrong, but I'll say they're very overstated. There are a few places where you are actually meeting people that you're going to be working with plausibly in the future, like computer science. And that's quite possibly is a big networking benefit, especially if you're at the very top schools. But if you're an English major, even an English major at a top school, the odds that you'll ever talk to another student who will even end up in the same industry as you is very slim, because English majors, they do get jobs, but they basically just spread all over the place. So really, for college to be a useful place for networking, you need to be in one of the more vocational programs where you're actually going to be making friends with people that are likely to be helpful to you in the future. There is this myth that almost anybody is useful, and the reality is most people are not useful to you. You need to get people that are going to be in a position to help you, and the people who are in a position to help you are ones that are going to be either coworkers or employers or customers.
And this is why networking is actually nonsense, because you cannot network if you don't have a product or an idea to add. So if you are interested in networking and one has a degree in computer science, you should network with computer scientists and business people and maybe some people in finance. When you show up at a networking event looking for people to talk to, that's really a waste of time. You're absolutely correct.
Right. So, although again, it's a bit more complicated. For example, if you're a realtor, the standard view in the industry is you really want to be part of a church and hang out at the church and attend very regularly and get to know a lot of people. And there, it's not like these people are learning about your knowledge of being a realtor. It's just that you become their friends, and then they think about you in the medium term when they're thinking about selling their house. So there are a lot of ways in which networking is valuable. And on the other hand, there are plenty of people who are very skilled, but they're just so standoffish and unfriendly that they miss out on a lot of opportunities. But yeah, like in general, you want to get people that are going to be in the same industry as you. Again, of course, if you're directly dealing with the general public, then almost anyone's a potential customer. Again, if you're a realtor or something like that. But yeah, most of the time you want to network with people in your industry.
But well, I made a point and you said that it's more complicated, but I don't believe that we're disagreeing. You mentioned real estate. If you're a realtor, you go to weddings, you go to funerals. Like for five
Yeah,
years, I crashed random funerals. This is not a secret. I've said it before. So if you're a realtor, you're going to go to places where people socialize
yeah,
and gain your trust. Because let me tell you this, Brian, it's really hard to secure clients in real estate. So at one point, I was speaking to a colleague of mine and an older friend of of my colleague, and the older friend at the time was like in her 90s and the colleague is in her early 40s, and they were saying that despite being in real estate, it's not unusual for their friends to buy a home, and yet that friend will choose another realtor. So real estate is quite intimate. Yes. So I wouldn't discount random networking when you're working in real
yeah.
estate.
All right.
It what is what they call the strength of weak ties. Like I have met many somewhat important people in a random sense. Like some time ago, I went to America and I met this random lady, and she said to me that her cousin was the first Greek ambassador to the United States. So I keep meeting random people in strange places, but I guess it's because I'm a strange person.
Right. I mean, you mentioned the strength of weak ties. So that was actually exactly the paper that I was attacking. So yes, there is a famous paper by Granite Vetter called "The Strength of Weak Ties," where he claims that just knowing an enormous number of people a little bit is somehow very useful in life. And as far as I can tell, everyone else who has ever researched the topic says he's wrong, but somehow he's got tens of thousands of
Yeah,
citations for this highly implausible article.
but speak a bit more on the topic, the strength of weak ties, because Granavita is very specific. He's not saying that you should meet random people. What Granavita is basically arguing for those who are unfamiliar with the topic is that when you meet random people, assess their value. So as you said earlier, know them a little bit.
So what I'll say is that research on this after Grenovetter has said there's basically two kinds of people that are useful: people in your exact industry and very close relatives who have your back. right? So those are the kinds of people that you want. So it's the strength of strong ties. People where you've got a very close, intimate connection, where it's very clear what the point of it is. That's what's useful. And then just knowing a lot of people slightly, contrary to Granite Vetter, is not helpful in life. Like he's very, barely helpful, barely helpful.
One study actually showed that well, I don't remember the exact percentage that was listed, but a sizable percentage of jobs are not actually advertised. So how do you get these jobs? Well, obviously, you would have to know the person well. So I get what you're saying about Granavita, because if I know Bryan Caplan from down the street and I know John Brown for 10 years, the average person will recommend John Brown because he has known John Brown for a longer period. But I'm not the average person. If I think that Brian is smarter, Brian is getting the recommendation. But most people are not like me. So, Brian, earlier in the conversation, you said that you, well, you didn't say it, but you basically hinted at it, that some subjects are not worth studying. What are these subjects?
Right. So, I don't know that I did quite say that, although
You
I
didn't say
do
it, you
believe
hinted
it.
at it. I got that
I do
impression.
believe it. Like, well, here's the critical thing. So whether it's worth studying depends upon you and what you're interested in, what you want to do with your life. So when I say, if I were to say something is not worth studying, what I really mean is it's not worth studying for an overwhelming majority of people. Like there's always possible that one person it could really be transformative for them, but nevertheless, if you ask me to go and list subjects that are a waste of time for almost everyone, I would say in the United States, foreign language study is a waste of time for almost everyone. Almost no American successfully learns a foreign language in school. Even if they did, most Americans would very rarely get a chance to use that foreign language. And of course, they would be very likely to forget it very quickly, precisely because they're not getting much practice. So that would be one example. But there's a lot of others. If you just go through the typical curriculum, you can see that there's a lot of material that is generally required, and yet it's not very practical. There's very few jobs that would use it. Most people would forget it if they did learn it. And yeah, so and of course, and on top of this, most people don't enjoy it either. So you put it all together and you say, this doesn't seem like a good use of time.
Brian, recently I interviewed Peter Lindert, and I said to him that he's a mythbuster. Foreign languages. I like to learn new languages, but again, you are correct. Most people in America don't need to learn Spanish or French. I'm from Jamaica. I studied Spanish and French up to grade 9, and my teachers were actually excellent. But no, most people really don't need to learn Spanish or French unless they plan to work as a diplomat or at a call center. And as we both know, many diplomats are not career diplomats. So even if they are inept at speaking a foreign language, they will get the job because of politics. So again, people are being deceived. Yeah, it's not easy to become a diplomat. But what about economics?
Right. Okay. So is economics a useful subject to study? So what I would just start off with a little pitch. I always tell my students, economics is the easiest of all the well-paid majors, right? Or actually I usually say the other way around. I say it is the highest paid of all the easy majors. Economics is the highest paid of all the easy majors. So if you don't know what to major at in college, I think economics is a very good default. In terms of how much economics most people will ever use in life, though, yeah, honestly, it's quite little. Most people who work in business never really learned economics. They have knowledge of their business and some common sense, but most of the stuff that economists have to teach them is not actually going to help them run their business notably better. There are certain life skills that I think that economics can give you if you apply yourself, but I honestly would say most economists don't. For example, economics tells you to walk out of movies if you're not enjoying them. And I and some other economists I know will actually follow this advice, but most economists that I know say, yeah, well, I know that's true in theory, but I'm not comfortable doing it. So even though they have all the knowledge, they don't act on it. So it winds up not being very helpful for them. So again, economics is a good way to open up doors. It does give you a path to many different jobs, but the odds that you'll actually use it on the job is quite low. Again, and not like philosophy where it's even lower, but most jobs that the economic students get are not ones where they actually use the economics they learned in school.
I think that economics is a worthwhile study, but then again, in my personal life, economics is like a hobby, so I'm highly theoretical. The deep roots of development, no one should major in the deep roots of development. Not at all. It's good to read. It's good to interview people like yourself and debate the topic. But should you study the deep roots of development and David Landis? No, you don't.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I always feel sorry for an intelligent person who doesn't know economics because to me, it's one of the main sources of meaning in my life. But I can't honestly say that people that study economics seem happier than people that don't. So, I would just say, look, if you're smart and you haven't studied it, your life is in a some sense impoverished, but it's not the kind of, impoverishment that you'll ever notice if you don't care.
It's just like utility. So again, we're talking about preferences and signaling. Utility is important to economists. If I prefer to write a book or to follow the stock market, I am enhancing my utility. The average person who's uninterested in economics and who likes to compare herself to other people. I'm just using a random example, me profile on Twitter or Facebook because that's how it is signal that you're part of the crowd. But as someone who's exposed to economics, I prefer utility. So if I'm speaking to Bryan Caplan or reading one of his books, my utility is being enhanced. That's how I live my life. I don't know about you.
So there are two possible reasons to study something. One is that it's going to actually help you in life. The other one is it just is for personal consumption. So, and honestly, what I say in my book is, look, if either of those two reasons is enough, the problem is so much education is neither actually raising your productivity nor is it something that people appreciate. So in which case, it really is a social waste, right? And then if on top of it doesn't even help you get a better job, then it's a further waste on top of that.
Productivity. Is there a link between education and productivity?
Yeah, so there's definitely a link. So more educated people are more productive. You can just see that they're making more money. So unless employers are real idiots and they're paying people extra money for nothing, then it is linked in that sense. But the real question is, to me, to what extent does education actually cause your productivity to go up versus demonstrate your productivity or signal or show or reveal or certify your productivity? And again, that's the whole point of the case against education, is to say that education is a very effective method of certification, but it's not a very good way of raising productivity. And because most of what you're learning, you don't really need to know.
All right, interesting argument. But Brian, I'm sure that you're familiar with literature on IQ. If you get a degree, it indicates that you're trainable, but there's no clear link to indicate that someone with a degree can write a book titled The Case Against Education. So my own view and based on what I've read is that again, people are employing individuals with MBAs and BAs because of the assumption that they're smart. But productivity and overall accomplishment is linked to personality traits and IQ. So if I prefer performance to degrees. There are many incompetent people with degrees, especially in the government where it's a bit harder to measure
Yeah, of
productivity. So
course.
again, employers are actually idiots because a BA doesn't indicate G. Anybody can get a BA. The college is quite easy today. It's not like the 1940s or before. So I don't really respect
So yeah, I would be very careful about saying that the entire occupation of people who are involved in hiring people are idiots. I think you really do need to put yourself in their shoes and say, well, what would I do if I were them? I have hundreds of applications for one job. Am I really going to go and give a detailed interview to hundreds of people? And I think your answer is going to be no. That just takes too much time. The question is, all right, well, then how do I sift through? And one of the main things that you're
the
going to do
BA
is
or the
use these
MBA.
educational credentials. So, and they're not stupid.
I didn't say that they were
It's
all
what
stupid. I
almost
said
it's what almost anyone in their shoes would do, and it's a reasonable approach. And one can be totally aware that many people who aren't good have degrees, and you can even know I hired some people who had degrees and look good on paper, weren't good in practice. then the question is, well, how can I find the people that are good who don't have degrees without spending a lot of time looking for them? How can I go and find the people who are bad but have degrees and avoid hiring them? And again, these are tough questions. It's really hard to do. So, I mean, I'd say that employers are generally doing the best they can with what they've got.
The
There
most
may
cost
be
efficient
some
tool.
lessons they could learn.
The
Pardon?
most cost efficient tool
Yeah.
using a degree. That's just yes, you're exactly correct. You are saying that if employers were employing people who do not produce, they would be idiot. But some are actually doing this.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
But
so
it's hard to identify the correct worker.
right. And the main thing is, like if you could actually measure productivity, that would be much better. But really, you've got to hire someone to measure the productivity. And once you've hired them, then you've already put a big investment in. And you're like, oh, gee, do I really want to go and fire this person and start over again? Maybe is this person tolerable anyway? And then on top of that, like I talk about in the book, there's a lot of psychological aversion to firing people once you've hired them. You think of this as the name the puppy effect. Once you met the person, you feel sorry for them. And so that's another reason actually not to be very open-minded. You're very, if I give this person a chance, they turn out not to be good, I may not have the courage just to fire them and say this isn't working out. I may feel like I'm stuck.
Brian, what is the sheepskin effect?
Sheepskin effect is the strong measured tendency of finishing a degree to raise your earnings compared to just being, say, one class short. So economists generally think of every year of education as raising your earnings by a constant percentage. But when you look at the data, that's totally wrong. And really what you see is that intermediate years of school generally have very little financial payoff, and graduation years have oversized payoffs. So, for college, I think I said the last year college explains about 70% of the total payoff, right? For high school, it's maybe more like half, something like that. But in any case, from the point of view of you go to school to learn skills, this is puzzling. Like, what do they save the skills until the last year? But from the point of view of certification, it makes a lot of sense because you say, look, part of what we're certifying is that you're willing to go and conform with social expectations about what it takes to finish. And then you say, well, dropout really is defying what social expectations. So nervous to go and give that person a chance that they won't just go and knuckle under to what's expected of you in our society.
Brian, should we continue to fund the public education?
Right. So what I say in my book is no. I also say that's going beyond the data. I just have additional reasons for this. What I say is, there's strong evidence that would be socially beneficial to drastically reduce funding for public education. Most obviously for college, but also for I talk about high school as well. And basically just to try to get people working at a younger age, especially people that are not academically inclined, which is most people don't like school. So really, you're just keeping them in there and wasting their time and creating this rat race where everyone needs to have a degree because everyone's got a degree.
And you, I'm familiar with the art author Anushek. So I read a review of your book some time ago in
So
Reason
sorry, what's the
magazine.
name of the author? I didn't hear the name of the author.
Anushek, Hanushek.
Oh, Henyashek, yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
Anushek. Yes, I read this review some time ago when you immediately published a book, and the writer notes Anushek own previous work suggests that increased education expenditures usually do little or nothing to improve educational outcomes. This bolsters the case for Kaplan's argument that we can radically cut education spending without losing much of value. Brian, for some time now, I've been interested in the mechanisms that increase value in education. How do we ensure that students are learning?
Well, step one is test them. There's a lot of hostility testing, and yet actual educational psychology says that testing is one of the best ways that we know to improve learning. Because if you don't measure it, then how do you know whether it's working or not? How do you know whether whether you need to put more time into something, whether you've already spent enough time on it? I mean, even if the test doesn't count for a grade, just giving someone some feedback, because human beings are just so full of themselves. It's so easy to convince yourself that you understand a subject until you're there alone with a test, and then you say, "Oh wow, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know how you even to begin to attack this problem." So testing is one. Another big one is spending more time on the tasks that you actually want people to learn and less on the other stuff. So yeah, I think it's especially crazy when kids aren't even literate or numerate to be trying to teach them another language. Look, they don't even speak their own language well. They can't write their own language well. Why are you trying to make them learn something else? They can't do the basics. So I mean, it's pretty simple, but time on task. Like if you're not spending enough time learning something, then you need to just put in more effort. I mean, I mean, for most things, when someone says, "Well, like it hasn't worked," it's like, well, we either give up or we could go and put 10 times as much effort into it. For something that's really worthwhile, yeah, maybe the 10 times the effort is the way to go, right? So someone hasn't learned arithmetic yet, all right? Let's just put 10 times more time in it, and so you can really learn it. But it's a foreign language, yeah. Maybe if you did put in 10 times as much time, you could learn the foreign language. But is that time well spent? Probably not.
Well, I'm 2 points. One, foreign languages. Some studies show that foreign languages improve executive function, and I'm just saying this because they keep knocking foreign languages, but they do serve a purpose. But I get your point. And secondly, the second point is more relatable. Countries like New Zealand and Singapore, they can toy with the idea of introducing coding to primary school students because their education systems are to a high level, especially Singapore. I am from Jamaica, and in Jamaica, a student can attend school for 5 years or even 7 and not know how to read and write well. And the government of Jamaica wants to introduce coding at the primary level.
Coding at the primary level.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's stupid. That's just downright stupid.
But well, at least coding, if it worked, it would have a big payoff, and it's something that you can do internationally without having to leave Jamaica. So there's something to be said for that. But yeah, if they were trying to make them learn French or something, then I'd say that's pretty ridiculous. In terms of these broader cognitive benefits of learning foreign languages, so my reading of the research is that that's basically made up and not true.
That's basically made up and not true. Okay, then we'll have one
Yeah, I
the
mean, and,
last.
if it were true, think about this. Bilingual countries should be much more impressive than they are. So Canada, like bilingual country, Belgium, do they really punch above weight? It's not clear that they do at all.
All right, then. So I haven't looked at this in a while, but I'll definitely review the data again. But foreign, I like languages. I didn't study any of them at the university level, but they do have a place.
Like if you like doing it, great. Or if you have a special kind of job where it's useful, or you really want to marry someone who speaks that language, all good reasons to learn it, not good reasons to make it a requirement in a curriculum.
Burn, can education make us virtuous?
Can, yes, does, no. So here's the thing, like can, almost anything can do anything. But in terms of research, researchers don't study what can happen. They study what does happen. And yeah, there's very little sign that education actually improves virtue. There are a few particularly amusing studies that I wouldn't put too much weight on, but they are funny. So there's one, there are a couple of studies of, are philosophers more ethical? And the answer is no. So I mean, there's one famous one where they just looked at whether philosophy books were more or less likely to be stolen from the library and found they are more likely to be stolen. So, haha, philosophers are book thieves. But there's also some other ones where they just ask philosophers a bunch of questions about their behavior, and they don't even claim to be better people than most people. So, all those years of studying ethics, and you're not a more ethical person, pretty striking. Um, yeah, so in my book, I go over a bunch of different measures of better behavior. And overall, yeah, I say like very little sign that education is making people into better people. Although, yeah, like it could, right? So, and I can believe that the right kind of education would, but the system doesn't deliver.
And again, Brian, but would we really want education to inculcate virtue?
Well, so I say most people do want it, and schools try. Um, like as a parent, I'm trying to inculcate virtue in my kids, and I do homeschooling, so I'm sort of doubling as a parent and as a teacher. But see, and the reality is that it's really hard, and that teachers are not really very persuasive to most young people. And so, just like when we go and try to measure the actual efficacy of this moral instruction, it's just really low.
Where my own position is that the context of virtue ought to be taught in the home. what is virtuous to Brian is not necessarily virtuous to John Brown. So if I'm going to send children to school and I don't have kids, I don't want them to be indoctrinated. And if they are going to be indoctrinated, I'm going to take them out.
Right. So, I mean, definitely you can see this for controversial stuff, for things that like don't hit other people. I don't see what the big deal is if schools try to teach it. It's just that I don't see that they are good at getting kids not to hit other people. If you read my second book, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, there I talk about how much, what is the evidence that parents are even good at inculcating virtue, and we just don't see very much there either. It seems like genetics play a much larger role. But anyway, so why don't we move on to open borders now?
Oh, you want? Well, I really like education, but since you want to talk about open
Yeah, yeah,
borders,
let's
okay.
yeah. All right, let's
All
press
right then.
forward. Moving
Open
on.
borders. What do you mean by open borders?
Open borders just means a immigration policy where anyone who does not belong in jail is free to live and work in any country they want.
All right, Brian, would you support privatizing citizenship?
Privatizing citizenship. You mean where a person can sell their citizenship?
No, let me
No.
explain. So it's a crazy idea that I coined some time ago.
Hmm.
John Brown wants to employ workers, but he likes workers from Bolivia. Should John Brown have the right to grant citizenship to Bolivian workers? So the government is responsible for granting citizenship, but should it be divested to private entities?
Right. John Brown is just a citizen of the country the Bolivians are going to work in, or what?
No, so you're in America and you want John Brown from Bolivia to work in America,
Okay.
but John Brown would need to go to U.S. Embassy and to apply
Uh-huh.
for citizenship or
And
a
and
visa
this
or
means this
passport
means
or
he could come to
whatever.
me instead. This
But
means he could come to me
my
instead.
argument is that the US embassies would play a less important role in granting citizenship. Entrepreneurs would have that right to grant citizenship.
And like any entrepreneur could give citizenship to anybody for free.
Yes, yes. Well, not for
Yeah.
free, but
So,
what do you think about that idea?
so I mean, I think it's a great idea. Basically, it is a backdoor way to doing what I want. Because yeah, if I could open up the Bryan Caplan Corporation and then grant citizenship to people to come work for me, then and I were able to do this as much as I wanted, then effectively the borders would be open because there'd be millions of people competing to do this, and we would basically be like letting us go and print up pieces of paper saying you're now a citizen, right? If you could do that, then the price of those citizenship papers would fall down to the cost of the paper, and it would be what I actually want, which is a world where you don't need government permission to move to another country to live and work.
And I'm actually pro immigration and pro market, but for those who argue that open borders would entail a destruction of culture by inviting undesirables to America, my idea would actually solve that problem because under privatization of citizenship, people who are going to America would need to prove that they're going to work. So
Yeah,
we'd actually get a higher quality of labor.
right. So it might be useful for people to believe that, but I mean, here's the thing. Look, I mean, I could just open up a shell business, a fake business, where I say all you do is you show up for one day, you jump on a pogo stick for 1 minute, and then that's your job, and here's your citizenship, right? And I could do that, or I could just run a farm and I say, yeah, you go and work for me for work for me for a while for free, and then you get a citizenship. The thing is if there's competition where anybody is free to do this, then the price of the citizenship will just fall to near zero, right? And again, like there's no particular reason for the employer to care about. Well, these people could be messing up the culture over the longer run. Like by then, I got my money, and you're doing your own thing. So, I mean, I think really to answer the culture argument, you've got to have a stronger defense, which I do have. And that is to say, like, I don't think these cultural arguments are very good. I think that, economies like the United States are great at taking people from almost any country on earth and giving them a job and making them into productive members of society. So of course, people don't magically learn new languages when they show up, but there are strong incentives to improve first of all, to learn the language before you come, and also to improve your language once you're here. So I think that that especially Western countries have a culture that is already very popular around the world, and there are many governments around the world that are trying to keep Western culture out. Immigration is a way to go and speed up what is already the natural process of westernization of the world, which overall I think is a fine thing, right? And then I say like most, I say like my main view about most of the cultural complaints is I just think that they are not sincere or well thought out. Here is my reason. When I go and look at people who complain about immigration, they generally live in high immigration areas, right? And yet, look, there are low immigration areas of the US they could move to. They could sell their house and go someplace else. And the fact that they don't choose to do so, I say actions speak louder than words. I say they don't really actually find the cultural effects of immigrants to be bad. Um,
Yes. So,
so
so
my dad lives in $1 million house in LA, complains about immigrants all the time. He could sell his house and buy a nice place in Idaho where there's hardly any immigrants, but he doesn't choose to do so, which I say means that his complaints are mostly just cheap talk. And it's not just that I don't take them seriously, he doesn't take them seriously either.
no. Remember, Brian, immigrants are rational actors. So if Atlanta is productive, Atlanta will attract immigrants. So clearly, some people who oppose immigration are not going to move to states that are unfavorable to immigration because those states will be less productive. When you leave America, it means you want a better quality of life. So if I were to migrate to America, I would go to New York. Immigrants are sensible people. They don't want to go they don't want to relocate to some place in poor rural America.
But of course, if you're a farmer, then that might be exactly where you want to go
If
because
you're a
that's
farmer.
where, yeah,
But again, remember,
that's where the
America is
jobs
an
are for you. But
industrial
yeah,
economy. So if you're a
yeah,
farmer from Africa and you decide to migrate to America, you may not want to continue with farming.
yeah, of course. Again, so I think we were very much in agreement here. All I'm saying is, the cultural complaint basically says, well, sure, immigrants want to go to the rich countries and rich parts of rich countries, but when they go there, their crummy culture is going to ruin everything, kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. And what I say is that people make this argument don't seem to believe it themselves, because when you see anti-immigration people who are in these areas that have had large increase in immigration, they almost never want to go and move away to a low immigration area, which means that, and again, especially if you're retired and no longer you don't worry about your job anymore, it's just like, well, like, is it nice to live in an area with very few immigrants? And I don't see that many people actually make this effort, which means that they themselves don't think it's a big deal.
All right, so let's talk briefly about the research on the culture of immigrants. And this research is actually not supporting the case against immigration. If people from countries that are pro-welfare culture migrate to America and continue to express preferences for redistribution, this isn't a compelling argument. I speak to people who are against immigration all the time, and I do cite these studies, but these studies are not really proving to us that on average, most people from pro-welfare cultures migrate to America and they're rabidly pro-welfare, rabidly socialist. I'm not seeing
Yes.
that evidence.
Yeah.
And America is based on, again, according to the data that I've read, America has succeeded at assimilating immigrants. It has not failed. It has not failed. And there are many studies on the topic.
Yeah. So unfortunately, a lot of these complaints are ones that people basically make up and they don't actually look at the numbers. So I did look at the numbers. And I will say, like, in the United States, it is true that foreign born people in the United States are, by most measures, a little bit more socialist than people that grew up in the United States. It's important to remember it's a little bit. A lot of the reason why it's a little bit is that native born Americans are so socialist that 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 you need to be even more socialist in order to be more than them. So important to keep that in mind. The main thing that I say, main thing that I say there, first of all, it's also true that there's assimilation. So while the first generation immigrants are probably a bit more socialist, doesn't seem like their kids or grandkids are. But secondly, I also say is particularly on the question of redistribution. Um, it seems that it is countries that are most homogeneous that have that tend to have the largest welfare states, and basically it's because people support welfare states largely out of a sense of national solidarity, and immigration tends to reduce the sense of we're a common national family, which then leads to reduced support. So when you put this all together, say like even if the immigrants themselves are going to vote for more welfare, they also tend to turn natives against it. So the net effect is probably actually in the opposite direction. Again, this is an argument where most of the research has been done by people that didn't like the conclusion, And therefore, I tend to think that the research is pretty solid, because if
Ye-
someone reaches a conclusion that they don't want to believe, you can trust they probably made a lot of effort to weasel out of the conclusion. So, a lot of this research comes from Scandinavian researchers who were worried, is it possible that letting in Somalians into Sweden will reduce Swedish support for the welfare state? And they were hoping it wouldn't, but generally concluded that it does.
Stefan Ma, yes, we have excellent data on the relationship between immigration and welfare. Immigration seems to depress support for welfare.
Yeah. So, again, like, not a decisive factor, but yeah, that seems that's probably the way that it goes.
But Brian, I think that we should study the impact of the culture of immigrants at the community level, not necessarily at the national level, because as I said earlier, 200 people or 2 million people with socialist views or collectivistic views may not be able to diffuse these views widely throughout the American society. And this is one of the reasons why I say to people that, yes, I do listen to your concerns in relation to immigration, but based on the data that we have been producing, we're getting information that describes the community level, not necessarily the national level.
Right. Yeah. So this actions speak louder than words argument is definitely strongest at the local level. Because if I tell my dad, hey, look, you're complaining about immigrants, but you live in a high immigration area, you could just sell your house and move to a low immigration area. Why not? I mean, that makes a lot of sense at the local level. If the whole country is high immigration, then you're asking someone to move to a new country, which is a lot harder, obviously. But I would say is, in order to say that the fact that people aren't moving doesn't prove anything, you'd have to say, well, immigrants are fine locally, but very bad nationally. And that, I think, is a pretty crazy view. I think you'd have to think that if they are dangerous for a country, that it would also be dangerous for a local area. So while logically speaking, you could hold the view that local immigration's fine, national immigration's bad. But again, I think it's a pretty incoherent argument, and I have never met a human being who believes it.
All right. Brian, what about the argument asserting that the state has a right to agency? So the state is a compilation of people, and these individuals create rules, laws, and regulations, and they govern people who contribute to taxes. And because a state as agency, what we call right to self-determination, it must have control over its borders. What do you think about that argument?
Right. So this is one of those arguments where people only make it selectively. And when you just ask, well, does this generalize? People barely have even thought about it. So, for example, you could say, look, Saudi Arabia, they're going and enforcing religion on the whole country, but it's their country, so they have a right to do it. And when you hear it that way, it's like, well, who's the they and who's the country? There's a bunch of people who have different religions who live there who don't want to have the government tell them what to do. And why shouldn't they be free to have their own religion? Why can't Saudi Arabia just have religious toleration like a civilized country? Right. And I would say the same thing for immigration, where it's like, well, this is our country. We should decide who lives here. Like, well, why couldn't it just be up to whoever owns the property? They can decide whether they want to have someone there. I mean, honestly, this argument
All right,
about,
quick
yeah,
point.
like our society, we deserve to have a say over who lives here. This also would imply that government should have the right to decide who can have children or not. It's the same idea of, are we going to allow the entry of new people into society? As to whether it happens through reproduction or immigration, it's hard to see what the difference is. So it's one where, like, there's a stated principle, but when you actually push people, the principle is more of a rationalization for something they already believed, and they don't apply it to other cases. So I don't think the argument doesn't seem very good even for the people that are making it, much less anyone else.
All right, so in the arena of Saudi Arabia, that's a matter of conscience and religious freedom, individual rights, and I think that it can be divorced from the issue of immigration. Back to what you said in your second point, private property. In a truly anarcho-capitalist society, property would be privately owned. So if you're going to visit John's Browns, then you would need his permission. And I think that the reasoning can be applied to the nation state. Do foreigners are foreigners obligated to benefit from the nation state?
But say, not only are those two ideas not compatible, they're directly incompatible, because the whole idea of private property is that you can do what you want on your own property, even if the government disagrees. And the whole idea of governments being able to do what they want is to say they can go and regulate private property, even if the property owner objects. So, I mean, while there are people saying, well, just like I can decide what happens in my house, the country can decide what happens inside the country. Yes, well, look, if the country can decide what happens inside the country, you don't have the right to decide what happens in your house anymore. So so if you say, look, I can decide whether you can open up a church in my house, therefore the government should be able to decide what churches can exist inside of the country. Right? It is the same argument, right? At least if you think of a country as being like private property, and I say the right resolution, they know country is not like the property of a society. Rather, society is a collection of private property where it's the person that owns it has the right to decide what to do, and the responsibility of other people is to mind their own business.
All right then. A brilliant takedown. But what about taxes, Bryan? Immigrant
So,
citizens pay taxes. My argument is this: should we believe that immigrants have a right to be accepted in another country without migrating legally? So we're talking about open borders. So you believe in the free movement, free flow of people, and nothing wrong with that. I do believe in the free movement, free flow of people too. But at the same time, I have some sympathy for those who think that taxpayers and citizens residing in a country should have a say in immigration. I do have some sympathy for them.
correct.
They
So
pay
I'd say,
taxes.
I'd say it's reasonable to say that taxpayers can decide who benefits from government programs, which is already true, right? So you can have a government program where non-citizens are not eligible to receive the benefits. I mean, right now, if you're a tourist in the United States, you cannot go and say, "Hey, I want to get Medicare." They say, "Well, you're not a citizen, so you can't get it." So again, like insofar as taxpayers are paying taxes to deliver benefits to people, then that argument makes sense. But to say, well, I pay taxes, so I should be able to decide whether my neighbor is allowed to go and start a business that hires immigrants. That's where I say, well, like why? It's like his property, his business. So what business is of yours? What he does? Right. And again, if we were to take this argument and actually take it seriously, then this would mean that taxpayers should also get a right to say what religions can exist in their society or who is able to speak, right? Or who's able to go and drive on the roads, right? So again, I'd say that this is an argument where if you actually take it seriously, you wind up with a totally socialist view of society,
Yes, yes.
right? Which again, so again, the idea that there's some connection between libertarianism and immigration restrictions is just bizarre. The connection is between socialism and immigration restrictions. If you believe that society is the collective property of the citizens, then socialism makes sense. Then immigration restrictions are an obvious part of that. On the other hand, if you think that that private property belongs to the owner, then like it is not the place of a stranger to go and tell me who I can invite onto my land or who I can hire or who can be in my store.
Let me give you a perfect example, Brian. As a foreigner, again, I'm a libertarian. I am not a globalist. Glo- I have an article coming out on the differences between globalism and globalization. I literally want to see the integration of capital. So if I'm a citizen in America and I want to buy a stock using I'm a citizen in Jamaica and I want to buy a stock using Robinhood, I'm blocked out of that market. I literally want capital to be integrated at the global level. So 401ks or IRAs, American investment plans, I want all of them. That's how I think. I'm thinking at the global level. So globalization is very different from globalism. Globalism is really a higher level of the regulatory state. So I do agree with some of your positions on immigration and the free movement of people. But the nation state, Brian, should it exist?
The
The,
nation state exist,
should it? Should
right?
it exist? Because you're basically saying that the nation state does not have a right to determine the people who will enter. That's what you're saying. So should it exist? If it doesn't exist, not a problem for me.
Yeah.
But should it
So,
exist?
first of all, like it's totally possible for a country for a nation state to exist with open borders. The United States had open borders
In
for, or
early
nearly open
years,
borders for hundreds of years. A bunch of other societies. So it makes no sense to say that you have to regulate immigration to be a nation state. In terms of whether or not it should exist, it's a big question. I'll just refer you to a fantastic book on the subject by my friend Michael Humer, The Problem
I
of
was
Critical
just about to
Theory.
say his name. I was just about to say Michael
Yeah.
Humor. I was just about just to say his name. But Brian, I'm immigrant again. I
So,
like data.
sorry, I'm running out of time.
Oh, you're
So
not
could
of
we?
time.
Yeah. So how about one last question and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, all right. So one last question. All right, so I'm going to be quick. Their immigration and institutions, Garrett Jones, that he published a piece in a recent, he published a recent article. Have you been following that debate?
I'm not sure how recent. So I mean, I've
A
definitely had a number.
2020 or 2021 paper, and Benjamin Powell and some others responded. Have you been following that debate?
Okay, so I don't think so. Not that one. So is that Alex and Rasta or who is that?
No, no,
No,
Garrett
someone else.
Jones, who
No,
does
Garrett Jones.
research
But
on
who is he arguing with?
Benjamin Powell and
Oh,
some
Benjamin
younger
Powell. Okay.
researchers. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I know a little. I mean, I think I remember a little bit, but I'm hazy.
Yeah, yeah, so you're running out of time, unfortunately. Well, it was a pleasure speaking to you,
Okay.
Brian, and I enjoyed our interview. I speak to a lot of bright people all the time, and you're really, really, really smart.
Oh, thank you
Yeah,
very
well,
much.
I
I
speak to
very
a
much.
lot of bright people all the time, and
You're very
this was,
perceptive.
yeah, I speak, yes, all the time, and you're a smart guy. Most people
All
usually
right.
just agree with me all the time, but you gave me a challenge today.
Okay. All right. All right.
Right.
So great talking to you.
Yeah,
And
and I
definitely
could continue.
send me the
Yeah.
URL when you post it. I'll get you
Yeah,
some
yeah,
clicks.
I could continue, but you have to go. So bye. But much more
Okay.
to say. All right, bye.
Okay. Bye bye.